أذنك يعني حتى زي كذا هكذا تعرف المتكتل صح.
طيب الله يبارك فيك. بين عثمان الله يبارك فيك. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد. We continue, Ikhwan, in the explanation of al-Kaba'ir by Imam al-Dhahabi rahimahullah ta'ala of Shaykh Abdul Razak ibn Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad. And we began last night, Ikhwan, in the 12th major sin, as we said, Zina, al-Zina, fornication or adultery. And we continue with the statement or the in the text of al-Dhahabi, وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم وسئل أي الذنب أعظم. And he mentions now, Ikhwan, the narration where the Messenger of Allah Muhammad was asked, what is the worst of sins? What is the worst of sins? The greatest and the gravest of sins. قال أن تجعل الله ندا وهو خلقك. It is to make a partner in worship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He was the one who created you. Shirk billahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. قال ثم أي. And then what after this? أي أن تقتل ولدك خشية أن يطعم معك. And the second he said, it is to kill your child fearing that it will eat with you and share your food. قال ثم أي. And then afterwards, what is the next one? He said, أن تزاني حليلة جارك. It is to commit fornication or adultery with your neighbor's wife. To commit fornication or adultery with your neighbor's wife. Now, Ikhwan, as we see in the wording here in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, we have first what? Shirk billahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second is the killing or the taking of the life unjustly of a child fearing it will eat with you. And thirdly, it is zina or fornication. And this goes back to the order that we mentioned in the ayah from Surah Al-Furqan. First, it was those who called on gods besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Next, it was to take a life unjustly. And third, it was to commit the act of zina. So here we see, Ikhwan, this particular hadith from the Prophet ﷺ in the same order. In the same order that we find in the ayah that we mentioned last night. And the Shaykh will mention something of that in the explanation, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. ثم ذكر المصنف, and then he says, Shaykh Abdul Razak says, رحمه الله, هذا الحديث عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه سئل أي الذنب أعظم. What is the worst of sin? And he mentions it is to call upon gods besides Allah, to create partners with Allah and worship like this when He created you, and to the end of that. وهذا الحديث ذكر فيه على الترتيب الأمور الثلاثة المذكورة في الآية. And the Shaykh, he says what we mentioned, that this hadith is in the same order. It's in the same order that we mentioned from the ayah from Surah Al-Furqan, ayat number 68. Surah Al-Furqan, ayat number 68. And which number is Furqan? 25. Right? Nur Furqan, right? Like this, Ikhwan, it's 25. Tajarik, to fornicate, commit adultery with your neighbor's wife. وحليلة الجار أي زوجة الجار, the wife of your neighbor's wife. وهنا هذا الحديث هو من الدلائل على تفاوت هذه الكبيرة. This narration, Ikhwan, shows us that this sin is of levels and degrees. This narration shows us that this sin of fornication, the sin of adultery, is of levels and degrees. And the point here, he says, Ikhwan, فَالزِّنَا بِحَلِيلَةِ الْجَارِ أَعْظَمْ مِنَ الزِّنَا بِبَعِيدَةِ الدَّارِ. That to commit adultery or fornication with one's neighbor's wife is graver and more evil than to fornicate with someone's wife who is at a distance, in another city, another area, right? And then he says, إخوان لأن في هذا الزنا أي بحليلة الجار تعد على حق الجار. Because on top of the fornication is what? Transgressing against one's neighbor. On top of the sin, the evil of the sin itself, on top of that now, ikhwan, is that one is doing an injustice, yani transgressing and encroaching upon the rights of one's neighbor. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man yu'min billahi wal yawmil akhir falyukrim jarahu." Whoever believes in Allah on the last day, then let them honor their neighbor. Let them honor their neighbor. So in this, ikhwan, this is certainly not honoring of the neighbor. Rather, this is, as we said, ikhwan, a transgression, an encroachment upon the neighbor, and therefore it increases the sin in degree. Sin is more severe when one does so with the neighbor's wife as opposed to one who is outside of that. And then he mentions the narration, لا يؤمن من لا يأمن جاره بوائقه, that yet he does not believe who does not make his neighbor safe from his evil. He does not believe who does not make his neighbor safe from his evil. فهو كبير من جهة الزنا. So it is a major sin. The adultery, the fornication in and of itself is a major sin. وكبير من جهة تعديه على جاره. And on top of that is a major sin because now he has encroached and transgressed against his neighbor. So this is evil on top of evil. Levels of evil. Right? As we said, ikhwan, there are levels and degrees to these affairs of sin. Fornication specifically here. And then he says after this, ikhwan, وَعُدْوَانُهُ عَلَى جَارِهِ. And it is also, ikhwan, enmity, causing of enmity and transgression, as we said, against his neighbor. وَإِفْسَادُهُ لِفِرَاشِ جَارِهِ. And corrupting the bed of his neighbor. Corrupting the bed of his neighbor. فَهُوَ كَبِيرًا مِنْ جِهَةِ كَوْنِهِ زِنَا. Again, he says, it is a major sin in the fact that the person has committed the act of zina, adultery and fornication. وَمِنْ جِهَةِ كَوْنِهِ تَعَدِّي عَلَى الْجَارِ. And from the perspective, ikhwan, that it is also, as we said, a transgression and an encroachment upon the neighbor. وَقَدْ قَالَ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ. Then he mentioned the narration that we said, he does not believe who does not make his neighbor safe from his evil. Who does not make his neighbor safe from his evil. وَقَدْ مَرَّ مَعْنَا أَنَّ النَّفْيَ الْإِيمَانِ لَا يَكُنْ إِلَّا عَنْ كَبِيرٍ. Now, this narration says he does not believe who does not make his neighbor safe from his evil. And the Shaykh says after this, ikhwan, that has already passed us, as it relates to these affairs, that the negation of iman, and these narrations, لا يؤمن من فعل كذا وكذا, he does not believe who does such and such and such and such, right? That when that affair of iman is negated, that is not a negation for a minor sin. When you read that kind of wording, that does not come for that which is a minor sin, or that which is, for example, someone only forgetting to do that which is highly recommended, or whatever it may be, right? This is as it relates to a major sin, when the affair of iman is negated in the narration. He says, نَفْيُ الْإِيمَانِ لَا يَكُنْ إِلَّا عَنْ كَبِيرٍ. The negation of iman is only when it is a major sin. Does not come except in a major sin. لا يكن نفي الإيمان عن مستحب أو أمور من الرغائب أو المستحبات فلا يكن نفي الإيمان إلا عن كبير. So he says, ikhwan, that this negation of iman is not for, again, as we said, someone left off something that was highly recommended, for example, or someone left off something that was highly encouraged or highly liked and desired and recommended. And the statement of the negation of iman is not used under those circumstances. So when we find something like this in the narration, he does not believe who does not make his neighbor safe from his evil, then this points to the fact that the one who commits that, ikhwan, is committing from the major sins. So again, ikhwan, the one who fornicates with the neighbor's wife, it is a more severe, a graver act. Because not only is it a major sin of fornication and adultery in and of itself, it is also the transgression and encroachment upon the rights of one's neighbor. فنفي الإيمان هنا الدليل على أن من يعتدي على الجار ومن يمارس العدوان مع جاره مرتكبا لكبيرة. And then he says, ikhwan, and in this negation of iman is evidence and proof that the one who encroaches upon his neighbor and practices this act of fornication, of encroaching and transgressing upon his neighbor, is committing a major sin. Is committing a major sin. وأي عدوان أعظم وأشنع من أن يفسد على جاره فراشه. And he says, and what sin could be graver and more despicable than one who corrupts the bed of his neighbor? This is tremendous, Ikhwan, because when one thinks about the idea of one's neighbor, especially in the bygone days, nowadays it's a little different now, but people really in neighborhoods took care of one another and kind of helped one another out. The old cliche, the old joke about borrowing sugar from your neighbor and those kinds of things. But in reality, those were how neighborhoods were at one time. Allah knows best now. Things have changed so drastically now. Things have become quite different now. But the idea of the neighbor, and the fact that the neighbor is someone, for example, if you were to travel out of town, they know that you're going, as opposed to someone in another part of the city or another part of the state or whatever it may be. Your neighbor knows you're coming, you're going, when you're home, when you're not home. So he has a lot of ability to do harm. But at the same time, he has the ability to do a lot of good and aid, to watch your home for you, for example, to watch your children for you, for example, to make sure that things are okay with your home. So therefore, to transgress and encroach upon one's neighbor is a special kind of evil. Here's someone who is right next door to you, or and the house is adjacent to your house, and now you're going to transgress and encroach upon them. This shows a special kind of evil, one that would corrupt his own neighborhood. And even in the past, Allah musta'an, you had a situation where even if people had their crimes, they wouldn't let you bring it on their block, right? Criminals, but they wouldn't let you bring the crime to their street, right? To their neighborhood. So as we said, how things have changed over the years. And then he mentions after this, Ikhwan, وَمِثْلُهُ هُوَ الَّذِي يَكُونْ فِيهِ مَعُونَ لِجَارِهِ بِحِفْظِ فِرَاشِهِ وَحِفْظِ أَوْلَادِهِ وَحِفْظِ بَيْتِهِ فإذا بلغ هذا المبلغ من السوء فهذا كبير وأكبر من مجرد الزنا. And this is what we just mentioned, Ikhwan, that the neighbor is one who's supposed to support his neighbor in the protection of his bed, in the protection of his children, in the protection of his home, watching over his home, right? So the Shaykh says, so if a person reaches this level of evil, that they would encroach upon their neighbor, he says, and there is no doubt, Ikhwan, that this is to the greatest levels, to the highest levels of evil and transgression, and it is greater than just the act of zina itself, in and of itself. And that does not decrease the act of zina for someone else outside of the neighbor, but the point is that this increases the act in evil. This increases the act in evil. So he says, فَالزِّنَا إِذًا يَتَفَاوَتْ وَبَعْضُ أَكْبَرْ مِنْ بَعْضٍ بِحَسْبِ الْمَكَانِ وبحسب الفاعل وبحسب المفعول به وبحسب الزمان وسيأتي عند المصنف رحمه الله أيضا أدلة تشهد بهذا المعنى. And then he says, Ikhwan, so therefore, as we said, zina is of different levels. Some of it is graver and greater than others from amongst it, the types, in relation to the place where you commit zina, in relation to the one who is doing the act of zina, in relation to the one who the act is being done to, and in relation to the time frame when the act is being done. All of this, Ikhwan, shows us the different levels of zina. And he says, and there will come from the author that which will testify to this, insha'Allah ta'ala. And now we go back to the matan, to the text of al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah ta'ala. قال عليه الصلاة والسلام لا يزني حين يزني وهو مؤمن ولا يصدق حين يصدق وهو مؤمن ولا يشرب الخمر حين يشربها وهو مؤمن. That the one who commits fornication is not a complete believer while he is fornicating. And I'm putting the word complete in there, Ikhwan, as we'll see from the explanation of the narration. There's a lot of times where people, as the Shaykh will mention, from the Khawarij and from the Mu'tazila and others, that they try to use this narration as a proof that if a person commits a major sin and they have disbelieved, they left Islam. Right? But that's not what is intended by the narration whatsoever. Shaykh Muqbil, he mentioned, rahimahullah, in the recording al-Hiwar مع جماعة التكفير, يعني a debate with the Jama'at al-Takfir like this. The Shaykh, he mentions, Ikhwan, that some of them try to claim that we encourage people upon sin, right? Because when we look at the narrations in connection with one another, and for example, we bring the narrations of wa'ad wal wa'id, the narrations of the threat of punishment but at the same time the narrations of the promise of forgiveness. And Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah takes those narrations, understands those narrations in connection with one another, together. As opposed to the Khawarij have looked to the narrations of wa'id, of threat, and those are the things that they focus upon. The Murji'ah, on the other hand, focus upon the narrations of al-wa'd, of promise of forgiveness. So they have gone, each one of those groups has gone to the extreme. As for Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, then they are between the extremes. They are between the extremes of the Khawarij and between the extremes of the Mu'tazila and the Murji'ah. So when we look at a narration like this, we understand it to mean, ikhwan, that the one who does this act is not a complete believer, right? A complete believer while he's doing that particular act. Not that that act has removed him from the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we'll see from the explanation, bidhnillahi ta'ala. The one who steals is not a complete believer while he is stealing. And the one who drinks intoxicants is not a complete believer while he drinks the intoxicants. In the sharh, the explanation, he says, وَهَذَا الْحَدِيث فِيهِ دَلِيلٌ وَاضِحٌ عَلَى أَنَّ الزِّنَا كَبِيرًا. This narration is a clear evidence and a clear proof that this sin of fornication and adultery is from the major sins. How is this a clear proof, ikhwan? How is it a clear proof that it's from the major sins, the narration we just read? Huh? What punishment? What punishment? Yeah, but what punishment? In the narration. The narration says that he is not a complete believer while he fornicates, not a complete believer while he steals, not a complete believer while he drinks intoxicants. There we go. We just mentioned, remember what the Sheikh said, that if you find in a wording, he does not believe, or he is not a complete believer like this, with regards to the negation of iman, of faith, then that doesn't happen, as we said, for the minor. So that's not mentioned for the minor sin. He said that is mentioned for the major sin. And then he said after this, ikhwan, لأن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم نفى عن الزاني الإيمان, because Prophet ﷺ negated from the fornicator, the adulterer, iman. فقال لا يزني حين يزني وهو مؤمن. While he is fornicating, he is not a believer. وعرفنا أن نفي الإيمان لا يكون إلا عن كبير. And he said, we have come to know, we have learned that the negation of iman is only for the major sin. It is only for the major sin. لا ينفى الإيمان عن أمر صغير. Because iman is not negated for something that is minor, from the minor sins. وإنما ينفى الإيمان عن أمر كبير. Rather, it is negated for something that is major. إما ترك واجب أو فعل محرم. Either from leaving off that which is obligatory upon you, or doing that which is haram for you. Either leaving off, abandoning that which is obligatory upon you, or implementing, practicing, falling into, committing that which is impermissible, forbidden for you. And the Shaykh says, لا يأتي نفي الإيمان إلا في هذين الحالتين. And the negation of iman only comes under these two circumstances. إما بترك واجب, he repeats himself, either by abandoning an obligatory act, or فعل محرم, or committing a prohibited act. ولا يأتي في النصوص أبدا نفي الإيمان لترك مستحب أو لفعل أمر مكروه أو صغيرة من الصغائر. لا يأتي نفي الإيمان في مثل هذا. And then the Shaykh says there are no texts that come in the negation of iman for someone leaving off something that is mustahab, for example, something that is highly liked, highly recommended, or from doing something that is makruh, something that is disliked. Who can give me an example of something that is disliked, something that's makruh? Who? Haram. The brother said that listening to music. Listening to music is haram. What's the evidence that listening to music is haram? Oh, stop. You said you remember a narration, but you don't remember what?
I don't remember exact details. I got it from class.
Go ahead. Generalize. يستحلون الحرير وغيره. Good. Hey, Ahsan. And then at the end of the narration, something else happens. One second. We don't remember. Anybody else remember? The narration in Bukhari. He's right. The first part of the narration mentions that the Prophet says that there will come a people who will try to make intoxicants, yani musical instruments. They will try to make them yastahilluna. They will try to make it permissible. Sheikh Ahmed Najmi, yani rahimahullah, the great scholar of Arabia, Saudi Arabia, from the southern regions of Saudi Arabia, the Sheikh, he mentions that for someone to attempt to make something halal means it has to be haram. If you have to try to make it halal, it has to be haram. And at the end of the narration, it mentions that those people will be at the side of a mountain, and Allah will cause that mountain to fall down upon them. Some of them will be killed, and and those who remain will be turned into apes and swine because of the sin of part of it trying to make music permissible. So this is a clear proof that the listening of music is haram. Sheikh al-Albani has a tremendous work, Tahrim Alat al-Tarb, the prohibition of musical instruments. As we mentioned, Sheikh Ahmed Najmi has that particular book, and I don't know if anything has been translated in English on that subject. Anybody know of anything? My brothers, no. Yeah, of course for the men in Bukhari. So no, haram, not makruh, haram. No. There's also a narration. Allah yabarik feekum. There's also a narration, يعني of Zavan al-Kindi, yani I mentioned it in the book of the Repenters. Yani Ibn Mas'ud found singing by the roadside, playing an instrument by the roadside, yani, and broke the musical instrument and rebuked him, yani, severely, and told him, yani, you have such a beautiful voice. If only you would use that voice in the recitation of the Quran, yani, as opposed to that which he was doing. Yani haram. No, I'm sorry, go ahead. What else? Eating with your left hand? Prophet ﷺ said, لا تأكل بالشمال فإن الشيطان يأكل بالشمال. Worshipping the sun? Kufr, shirk. Huh? Divorce? Where do you get that from? أبغض الحلال, that's ضعيف. That narration is weak, akhi. Sunan Abi Dawood is ضعيف. The most hated of the halal things is divorce, is ضعيف. That narration is not authentic. Collected in the Sunan of Abi Dawood, Sheikh al-Albani and other scholars declare that narration to be weak. Not authentic. Yeah. We would disagree with that. But, yeah. What do you mean with that? What do you mean with hands down? You talking about in qiyam, or when you come out of ruku'?
No, just like qiyam.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about coming out of ruku'. I was going to say, يعني نحن مع الشيخ ابن باز والمشايخ في هذا. Nah, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Laysa fi ardi qawmi." The Prophet just wasn't from the land of my people. He didn't need it. But we might have to put a book together on the makruh things. Hey now. We mentioned that yesterday. Not bad. Alhamdulillah. We'll move on, inshallah ta'ala. We'll move on. Anyway, so the point that the Sheikh is making here is that I'm glad I asked that question because I heard music, worshiping the sun. I ain't being funny, but we gotta tighten it up a little bit, inshallah. Tighten up a little bit. Nah. Allah yabari fikum. Khairan, inshallah. So he says that the negation of iman does not come in the leaving off of something that is mustahab or doing something that is, for example, makruh. or a minor sin, he says. Rather, the negation of iman only comes, as we said, in the major sin. فإذا نفي الإيمان هنا دليل على أن الزنا كبيرة. So therefore, the negation of iman here is an evidence and a proof that the zina is from the major sins. وفي الحديث فائدة أخرى عظيمة جدا يحسن أن نتنبه لها تتعلق بتعريف الإيمان وحده. He says, Ikhwan, that in this narration is another tremendous benefit that we should pay attention to, that is connected to the definition of iman. Connected to the definition of iman. حيث دل الحديث على أن ترك المعاصي إيمان. This is nice, Ikhwan. This narration points to the fact that abandoning sin, abandoning transgression against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it enters into the name of iman. It enters into the definition of iman. لأنه بفعلها نفي الإيمان. Because the one who does the act, iman is negated from them. So therefore the one who abandons that act, does not do that act, then the name of iman, or falling into the definition of iman, is found in that affair. And the Shaykh, he says, Ikhwan, he says, إِذَنْ بِتَرْكِهَا وَمُجَانَبَتِهَا وَالْبُعْدِ عَنْهَا يَتَحَقَّقَ الْإِيمَانِ. He says, so therefore, leaving off that sin, staying away from that transgression, removing yourself far away from that thing, also, Ikhwan, brings about iman. Brings about iman. فَإِذَنْ تَرْكَ الْمَعَاصِي وَتَرْكَ الْكَبَائِرِ هَذَا دَاخِلٌ فِي مُسَمَّى الْإِيمَانِ. So the Shaykh says, therefore, abandoning sin and abandoning the major sins enters into the definition of iman. It's a very nice point that the Shaykh mentions here. حفظه الله تعالى. And he said after this, إخوان, فإذا الإيمان كما أنه يشمل فعل الطاعات فإنه أيضا يشمل ترك المحرمات. So just as the name iman, or the word iman, comprises actions of obedience, it also comprises remaining away from the impermissible things. So for example, the one who refrains from listening to music, the one who stays away from listening to music, refrains for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that enters into the definition, he says, of iman. Tremendous point. وَالْحَدِيثُ وَاضِحُ الدَّلَالَةِ عَلَى ذَلك. And this narration is a clear proof of that. As it relates to music, Quran, Allah yabarik fikum, I don't know if there's anything that has been written in English on this subject or this topic, but certainly, inshallah ta'ala, Ikhwan, we need to be careful as it relates to some of these matters, especially when it relates to music. As it's one of those things now that even on the cell phones, many of the ringtones are musical songs and sounds, tunes, what do they call them? Auto tunes. I don't know if they even call that anymore. They call that anymore? Huh? That's a thing still? Ringtone. What did I just say? I don't know anything about this stuff. Alhamdulillah. Ala kulli hal. He says the ringtone. So now, when you might be in the masjid, for example, and the people are praying. Next thing you know, you hear some polka beat or something come up on someone's phone, Ikhwan. And in those instances, Ikhwan, as I mentioned last night, we need to be very careful about the things that we allow to enter, these haram things into our homes and into our lives. Right? And from that, Ikhwan, are the phones. As we said, sometimes they have the default ring, and the default ring is one of these musical songs or tones. And they make sure that we change this, Ikhwan. They take it off, remove it whatever you need to do. Shaykh al-Albani, rahimahullah, I know I've told this story before, but it bears repetition. Shaykh Nasr, as we know, Ikhwan, was a master watchsmith, fixed watches. And he said, Ikhwan, he used to go around, he used to travel, and sometimes he would come into a particular masajid, and there would be the grandfather clocks. You remember the grandfather clocks? And we know that at midnight or different times when the bell would ring, there would be chimes, right? Chimes of bells that would ring at a certain time. So Shaykh Nasr said that he would explain to the people the affair of bells and the different narrations regarding bells. And what he would do is he would tell the administration of the masjid, and he would seek permission from them to remove the bell, the sound of the bell, keep the clock intact, but remove the sound of the bell from the clock. And the Shaykh said, because here we are in the masjid, right, in the place where we're supposed to be practicing the affair of tawheed, of salah, these different actions of tawheed, the salah and the dhikr, and to the end of that. And we have the reminder of shirk, the sound of the Christian's bell going on in the masjid. So therefore, ikhwan, we need to be mindful of these kinds of things. Let us remove these sounds from our phones, these musical instruments. And to the end of that, and so as when we're, especially in the masajid, the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ikhwan, the prayers are not being disturbed by these musical instruments. And this happens more often than one would imagine. This happens more often than not. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us. Ameen. So then the Shaykh says after this, ikhwan, وَالْمَرَادْ بِالْإِيمَانِ الْمَنْفِي لَيْسَ أَصْلُ الْإِيمَانِ. And here's the point that I was making earlier. He says that what is intended by the iman that is negated here is not the foundation of iman. Not the foundation of iman. Right? He says, يعني ليس المراد, and it's not intended by the narration that while he is fornicating he is not a believer. أي أنه خرج من الدين, that he has left Islam by this action. وصار به كافرا, or that he has become a disbeliever by it. ليس هذا المراد, this is not what is intended. إنما الإيمان ينفي بترك ترك الواجب أو من الواجبات أو فعل أمر من المحرمات. So it is either by, as we said, leaving off something that is wajib, or it is committing something that is from the muharramat. فَيُنْفِ الْإِيمَانِ وَيَكُونْ عَلَى هَذَا مَنْفِي لَيْسَ أَصْلُ الْإِيمَانِ. So again, ikhwan, what is intended here is not the foundation of faith. The foundation of faith. وَإِنَّمَا الْمَنْفِي كَمَالُ الْإِيمَانِ الْوَاجِبِ. Rather, what is intended here, ikhwan, is the obligatory iman. And what is intended by the obligatory iman, as we said, that which completes the iman. That which completes the iman. And that's very important for us, ikhwan, to pay attention to. And even this term, ikhwan, al-iman al-wajib, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and others, they explain the meaning of al-iman al-wajib. They translate it as obligatory faith. But what is intended here, ikhwan, is one who observes the obligations that are upon him from prayer, from fasting. To the end of that, they observe those actions that are obligatory upon them, and they refrain and stay away from those things that are impermissible for them, haram for them. This is what they. This person does not deserve the name believer in the complete form, a complete believer. It is not said that person is a complete believer, for they have brought that which decreases their iman. That which decreases their iman. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ فِي وَقْتِ نَفْسِهِ خَارِجًا مِنْ مُطْلَقَ الْإِيمَانِ. And at the same time, they are not removed from faith altogether. Right? They're a believer, their iman has decreased by this action that they have done. So they're not a complete believer, nor have they left the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is important. And then the Shaykh says after this, فَأَصُلُ الْإِيمَانِ بَاقِي. The foundation of belief remains. The foundation of belief remains. لكن خرج من الإيمان المطلق أي الإيمان الواجب. And again, he mentions what we mentioned before, that there remains with him that iman al-wajib. Again, he has refrained from that which the impermissible things, and has gone to those things that he has been commanded to do. Now I'm trying to look, because the Shaykh repeats himself here. Do you know what kind of car it is?
I don't know what. I'm just I tell whatever parking on the bus stop to move the cars. And over there in that fish market, they're going to get towed.
All right, the fish market and the bus stop. The only thing is, if a person in the bus stop, they don't know they're in the bus stop. They're not, you understand what I'm saying? You just say bus stop, not my car, right? So it makes sense to know whose car we're talking about. Ikhwan, the brother just made a reminder that if your car is parked in a bus stop, then the car will be towed. I guess the bus stop is right here on the corner. And the fish market, also the fish market, they will also tow. Allah yabarik. So if your car is parked in a bus stop or parked in the fish market, then we're reminding inshallah ta'ala to move your car. Very nice. Khairan inshallah. In the next narration, ikhwan, in the matan, he says, وَقَالَ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ إِذَا زَنَى الْعَبْدُ خَرَجَ مِنْهُ الْإِيمَانُ فَكَانَ كَالظُّلَّ عَلَى رَأْسِهِ ثم إذا أقلع رجع إليه الإيمان. He mentions in the next narration, Ikhwan, and he says upon the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim, the hadith says, if the servant commits the act of fornication, Iman leaves from him and it's like a shadow over his head, and then when he leaves off that act, it returns to him. He says, إخوان ثم أورد رحمه الله هذا الحديث. And then he says that he brings this narration that if the servant commits this act of fornication, then the iman hovers above him, as they translate it, like a dhulla, like a shadow. ومن المعلوم أن الظل ملازمة للشيء ليست منفكة عنه تماما. And he said, as it is known, إخوان, that a shadow remains with you, right? It remains connected to the body. That thing that it is, the shadow that's being cast remains, or the object that casts the shadow, and is not completely separated from it. It's not ever completely separated from it. Shaykh Uthaymin, Ikhwan, he said that from the beautiful teaching etiquette of the Messenger of Allah Muhammad ﷺ is he would always give these kinds of examples, Ikhwan, that could make the thing concrete for you, that you could see it and understand it. Right? So now when you think about this, Ikhwan, you think about the idea of a shadow. If you ran down the street as fast as you could, the shadow remains with you, right? It doesn't go anywhere, right? So the point of this, Ikhwan, is that even though the iman comes out, because the shadow is not inside of you, right? It's outside of you, but it's still connected to the thing that is casting the shadow. So this, Ikhwan, when one really examines the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, they see tremendous understanding, right? Tremendous teaching from the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, and how he gives these examples that Shaykh Uthaymin mentioned in his explanation of the 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi. So it is connected, or it is and remains with the body, that thing, and is never completely separated from it. فالحديث لا يدل على أن من زنى خرج من الملة وصار بزناه كافرا. So this narration is a proof that the one who commits the act does not leave the millah, does not leave al-Islam by this action of theirs. They do not become a disbeliever by this action. Now that is, of course, Ikhwan, unless they make that act permissible. If the person makes that act permissible, and we know, Ikhwan, al-istihlal, if a person makes an act permissible that is impermissible, then by that person becomes a disbeliever. So for example, Shaykh Uthaymin, he describes this, Ikhwan, in a way, in his explanation of Riyadh al-Salihin, regarding the issue of tawbah, and he talks about the one, for example, who wants to, they want to make i'tiraf, they want to confess a sin. Now Shaykh Uthaymin said it's not permissible for a person to confess their sins, right, to uncover their sins, unless, for example, one is going to the ruler for the punishment. One wants to receive the punishment for the sin that they committed. Under those circumstances, as we know from the narration of Ma'iz and the narration of al-Ghamidiyya that we mentioned yesterday, that it is permissible for the person to go for the purpose of seeking the head, the punishment. Now Shaykh Uthaymin says, still even in that, the origin of the matter is to hide the sin, to cover the sin, and to repent what is between the slave and his Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if, for example, a person fears that they will not be able to make a tawbah nasuh, a sincere repentance, and they know for certainty they're going to go back to the act, then in that instance, they would go, for example, to the ruler to receive the punishment. But Shaykh Uthaymin goes on to make another very important point in this issue of confession, the idea of confession. And he talks about there are people that go beyond this idea of confession to the level of bragging and boasting about a particular sin. Bragging about how much they fornicated, bragging about what they did with such and such a woman, bragging about what they did in such and such a land or country. The Shaykh said, Shaykh Uthaymin said, it is feared for this person. Listen to this. It is feared for the one who brags and boasts in this manner that they will disbelieve by this. Because no one who knows that this thing is haram, impermissible, from the greatest and the gravest of the major sins, would be boasting and bragging about that thing in that manner unless they thought that that thing was halal, permissible. Now, when I read this, Ikhwan, I wanted to be careful before I actually, make sure I was understanding it properly. So when we were in Riyadh, when we visited Sheikh Fawzan, and we were walking back from the Masjid with Sheikh Fawzan, I mentioned what I read in the book, and I just want to make sure I was understanding it properly. And the Sheikh said, Na'am. This is what is feared for the person who would be bragging and boasting about something that is known to be haram in al-Islam. It is feared that they will leave Islam by this boasting and bragging about fornicating. Recently, Ikhwan, we know that the same-sex marriage was made legal, permissible. Legal. There was as they say, a ruling that was made legal, federally. And so it was asked about people who contractually marry. And Sheikh Ubaid, he mentioned that those who contract a marriage, same-sex marriage, have disbelieved. This is important. Now the Sheikh differentiated between those who do the act. It's a major evil sin, right? The act itself. But the contracting of the marriage, he said. Okay. Mercedes-Benz with the license plate L26CLE. New Jersey license plate L26CLE. So Mercedes-Benz, you are about to be towed. You are in the process of being towed. Please move your car post haste. So the Shaykh, he said, Allah ihfadhu, may Allah preserve him, that by contracting this thing, you are saying what? It's halal. He says halal. It's one thing for the person, and again, evil, major sin to do the act, right? It's another thing now to say that I'm going to make a contract of marriage between two people. You are now saying that this thing is permissible. So therefore, Ikhwan, we see this thing becomes different when you make istihlal of a particular sin. So that's the point that I wanted to make as it relates to that issue. And then we go on. Sheikh Abdul Razak, he continues. He says, al-dhulla, again, that shadow is something that, as we said, remains with the person and does not leave for them. فَدَلَّ ذَلِكَ عَلَى أَنَّهُ أَصْلُ الْإِيمَانِ. So this shows, Ikhwan, that it is the foundation of Iman, baqin indu, that the foundation of faith remains with him. It's like a shadow hovering over him. It's still there. Still there, still connected. And then when he leaves off that act, it returns to him. وَلَكِنَّهُ بِالزِّنَا خَرَجَ مِنْهُ الْإِيمَانِ الْوَاجِبِ. But there is removing, Ikhwan, that Iman al-wajib, we mentioned earlier, الذي وعد صاحبه بالثواب والجنة والنجاة من النار والعقوبة وسخط الله. That Iman al-kamil, complete Iman, of which the one who does that, who performs that Iman al-wajib, has been promised, as we said, reward, and has been promised paradise, and has been promised to be made safe from the fire, and been made safe from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his anger. So therefore, Ikhwan, the one remains away from these acts, as we said, is affairs from Iman al-Wajib. And he says, يَكُونْ خَرَجَ مِنْ هَذَا الْإِيمَانِ. So he has been removed from this type of Iman, that complete Iman. وَلَا يَكُنْ خَرَجَ مِنَ الدِّينِ قُلِّيًّا. But does not mean that he has left Islam altogether by the act. لأن الظل كما علمنا له ارتباط ونوع صلة وهي ملازمة للشيء. And he said, because the shadow, as we have already said, Ikhwan, remains connected, remains apart or connected to the thing that casts that particular shadow. And then he says after this, Ikhwan, إذا أقلع رجع إليه الإيمان. And if he leaves that thing off and abandons that thing, then the Iman, faith returns to him. يعني رجع إليه الإيمان الواجب الذي خرج منه. He says what returns him, Ikhwan, is that al-Iman al-Wajib that we talked about before, that obligatory Iman is what returns to him. الذي خرج منه ليس أصل الإيمان, again, and not the foundation of Iman. The foundation of Iman, he says, remains with him. وإنما الذي خرج منه الإيمان الواجب فينبغي أن يفهم هذا الأمر حتى لا يذهب بالإنسان الفهم إلى مذهب السيء فيظن في الحديث دلالة على ما ذهب إليه الخوارج أو المعتزلة بخروج المرتكب لهذه الكبيرة الخروج من الإيمان كليا. And we're going to end on this point, inshallah ta'ala. The Shaykh says, so one must understand this affair properly. So they do not go to the evil methodology. And evil methodology, misunderstanding this narration, and going to the ideology of the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila. Going to the ideology of the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila, that the one who commits this act has left Iman altogether. The one who commits a major sin has left Islam altogether and will be from those who will dwell in the hellfire forever. As we know, this is from the methodology and the creed of the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila. Khawarij and the Mu'tazila. And then he says after this, Ikhwan, بمعنى, meaning, أنه أصبح كافرا أو خارجا من ملة الإسلام, meaning that the person, that they say, has become a disbeliever, leaving the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, leaving the faith of al-Islam. فالحديث لا يدل على هذا. This narration does not say this. This narration does not prove this or point to this. لا من قريب ولا من بعيد. Not from near or far. From near or far. This narration does not indicate this. فالإيمان الذي خرج هو الإيمان الواجب. And Sheikh's repeating himself over and over. He wants to make sure it's understood that what is intended here is that the person is left from that Iman al-Wajib, meaning the obligatory Iman, staying away from the haram acts and falling into the impermissible or prohibited acts. That the person is left from that Iman. And then he says after that, Ikhwan, لصاحبه, he says, الذي لصاحبه الوعد يعني والسلامة من الوعيد. And so the one who has this Iman wajib, and he says, then this person is promised safety from the threats of punishment that come in a number of narrations. فإذا رجع ونزع عنه هذه الكبيرة رجع إليه هذا الإيمان الواجب. So if he leaves off that major sin and returns to proper obedience, then his Iman, that Iman al-Wajib, like that shadow, comes back to him. أما أصل الإيمان لا يخرج بمجرد ارتكاب هذه الكبيرة. As for the foundation of faith, as for the foundation of belief, then it does not leave him simply because of committing from these major acts, as we said, in opposition and contradiction to the likes of the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila. And with that, Ikhwan, and there's much more in the chapter, but we'll end here, inshallah ta'ala, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to finish and what remains of this. Shaykh brings so many benefits. Allahu Alam. I'm not familiar with that. There are a number of narrations. Shaykh al-Albani in Tahrim al-Tar, the prohibition of musical instruments. Of course, he collects a number of these narrations. The sisters close the door, keep the door shut. Allah yabarik feekum. There are a number of these narrations that the Shaykh he mentions. And he also, in the book, alhamdulillah, ikhwan, he also he clarifies, and it's something of Ibn Hazm and others who try to say that the narrations of prohibiting music, all of them are weak. And you have from the people who say that the narrations prohibiting music are weak. Shaykh Nasr, rahimahullah, in this book, he clarifies and shows the strength of these narrations, many of these narrations. If that was from them, I don't recall. Bid'ah. The ulama, they mention that from bid'ah, but we've read from some of the people say if a person just does it out of a customary act, leave it off. Prophet ﷺ used to do what when he made dhikr? After the salat, what did he use? His fingers. It's sunnah. Practice the sunnah. The ulama, they mention every time a person leaves off a sunnah, we say goes to an innovation, then they leave off a sunnah opposite to it. So now you're going to do something with something else when the Prophet ﷺ used his fingers. So we do what the Prophet ﷺ did, and that is the best of guidance.
Two terms, I just want to make sure I got it right. You said Iman al-Wajib.
Yeah, let me read the definition. I wrote a nice definition down. They translate it as obligatory faith, observing obligatory duties while refraining from the prohibited ones. It's very simple. That's what it means. That means, without restriction like this. Complete.
someone asks, here you have a believer practice. Sure, it's the best of knowledge, correct?
Inshallah.
He commits a major sin. He dies while he's committing that major sin without
Allah protect us, preserve us.
Without getting a chance to make up. What? If you don't know the answer, just
Well, ask the question. Ask the question, and maybe we can figure out if we know it or not. Go ahead, get it out.
Might not, but
Get it out.
saying, we know that the disbelievers, when they die, they soul is snatched from them.
حديث عازب يعني براء بن عازب. Go ahead.
And Allah allows all of this room to die.
آمين يا رب العالمين. آمين يا رب العالمين.
How, at that point, will the angels come to him?
What do you mean how?
Like, will they come, will his soul be snatched, or will it still?
The believer?
No, I mean, that act of major sin. If he dies in that act of major sin, how will his soul be taken?
I mean, أخي الله يبارك فيك. As for a particular individual, what can I say? The narration of the Prophet ﷺ and the narration of Bara bin Azib, the Prophet ﷺ described how the soul of the believer will be taken from him, and it describes how the soul of the disbeliever, of the fajr, the wicked person, will be taken from him. The very long narration in the Sunan, in the Muslim of Imam Ahmed, and it mentions that as for the believers, we know that his soul will be taken with ease, like the water that flows from the what do they call that thing? Like a vessel, the water skin or whatever it may be, taken out with ease and given salams and to the end of that. And that's what you said. They mentioned the disbeliever, the fajr, the wicked one, is mentioned in the narration. His soul will be taken, violently, and snatched from him. That's for an individual. Allah knows best. Nah.
Regards to the explanation the Sheikh was given to bragging.
You are familiar with that narration of Al-Bara bin Azib, the very long narration? Tremendous narration. Nah.
Bragging about committing a major sin
A'udhu billah. Nah.
is picture taking a major sin.
Actually, right now,
Punishment it holds.
we're working. We're working on finishing Sheikh Muqbil's book on pictures, and the Sheikh has some of the strongest positions as it relates to pictures. But of course, the narrations mention the person who will receive the worst punishment will be the image makers, the picture makers.
So does that
Huh?
fall into major sin?
Allahu Akbar. Yeah, clear. But the question you're asking, I'm not going to. I mean, I know what you're asking me. I'm not getting into that. Allahu Akbar.
Now, it may just seem to be expedited by other than Tawbah.
I'm glad you asked that question. I was actually going to clarify this. Alhamdulillah. A brother came to me. I'm going to end on this. A brother came to me, and he said that he heard something that I said on a recording, and I haven't had a chance to verify whether I said it or not. But let me clarify it anyway, just in case. That I said that the 2 rak'ah of Tawbah, the prayer for Tawbah, is only for the minor sins. That's not correct. What's correct is that if one commits a major sin, then the 2 rak'ah of Tawbah is not sufficient for the forgiveness of that sin. One has to do the conditions of Tawbah, which are to have nedam, remorse, to abandon the sin, and to determine to never return to it. If the person does those 3 things and doesn't pray the 2 sunnahs, or the Tawbah prayer, the early man, they say he's brought the conditions of Tawbah. But if he prays the prayer for Tawbah on top of that, they say, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says, ziyadat al-khair. This is good on top of good. So one can pray the 2 rak'ah of Tawbah for the major sin as long as the other conditions of Tawbah have been met. So I want to make sure that I clarify that if that's what I said, then that was a mistake. And I'm only saying if that's what I said because I didn't get a chance to go back and listen to the recording. I'm not, we don't want to be from those people that say, if I said something wrong, right, when you know you said something wrong. So the reason why I'm saying this is because I haven't had a chance to actually go back and listen to the recording, right? So if those are my words, it was erroneous. That's an erroneous statement for me, if that is what came from me. Now what Ibn Abdul Barr mentions, as I mentioned in the book of the Stories of Repentance, is that Ibn Abdul Barr, he mentions that it is true, it's also true, that if a person thinks that all they need to do for a major sin is pray 2 rak'ah of Tawbah, then this person also has an erroneous thought in their minds, right? So that's the balance that we sort of understand there. Allah you better keep it. That's it. Let me just say this, Ikhwan, just one more point. And I want to kind of focus and hone in on this point. This issue of, we'll talk about the issue of Tawbah. That if a person makes an error, a mistake, and in the book also, and I'm not trying to sell the book, Ikhwan. Now, the last point I wanted to make, Ikhwan, it comes in the story of the Tawbah of Abul-Hasan al-Ash'ari. Abul-Hasan al-Ash'ari, who made statements, or said what he said as it relates to the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and other than that from the affairs of Iman, Tawheed, al-Asma wa Sifat. And then he repented. And his repentance was that he came into the Masjid and ascended the minbar on Jumu'ah, on the day of Jumu'ah, and said that those who know me, then you know me, and as for those of you who don't, then I am Fulan, the son of Fulan, and I used to say such and such and such and such. And he clarified exactly what he said, and he says, and now I say such and such and such, in other words, refuting and rejecting what he used to say. And he said, and I throw off what I used to say, like a person would take off their thobe and throw it down, to the end of that in the narration. And not only did he do that, after he got down from the minbar, it mentions in the narrations, that he went and he actually penned and authored books in refutation of what he used to say and what he used to do. So we should never be from a people, Ikhwan, who, if a person makes a clear-cut error, you say something that you shouldn't have said, you've done something that you shouldn't have done, publicly, you've made a public statement, you've written something publicly that has gotten out to the people and it's spread on you, and now someone comes back and they show you your error. Person should never get in front of the people or write and say, if I made a mistake, or if anyone understood from what I said that I meant A, B, C, and D, then I seek forgiveness or whatever it may be. The person should be resolute. The same way you put that statement out there, be as strong and as forceful in the repudiation of that what you said, because it was erroneous. And this idea, if that's not what I meant, those are your words. Those are your words. Who knows the narration when the companion came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, MashaAllah wa shi'ata ya Rasulullah, whatever you and Allah wills. What did the Prophet ﷺ say? Huh? Ahsan, have you made me a rival with Allah? Say whatever Allah wills, right? Here's the point, Ikhwan. That companion, Sheikh Rabi'a mentions in one of his books, that was a noble companion. There's no question that we don't think that companion intended to make the Prophet ﷺ a rival with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but even with that, the Prophet ﷺ refuted the words, the actual words, because words carry meaning. So therefore, if a person makes a statement, and the statement is there for us to see, then we judge that statement by its apparent meaning. And the person should retract and repent that in accordance to what they said or what they wrote, not in the sense of what they meant. Right? Do you understand what we mean here when we say this? Yeah.
Talking about earlier, excessive eating, excessive laughter, joking, considers medicine.
Yeah, that's it. That's what I was looking for, something like that.
Anything that's not attached to religion, you push excessive.
That's what I was looking for, actually, something like that. Some of the stuff I heard was a little.
Sometimes light bulbs not on all the time.
Alhamdulillah.
It flickers.
Actually, Rahmah, like I said, the first so to the point where Rahmah, he actually was a what I'm saying is, I'm saying the actual act itself is I don't know if it's still holding.